Ellen Corby stood at the edge of Walton's mountain for what she believed might be the last time, and no one on that set knew if she would ever return. It was 1976, and the woman who had built Grandma Esther Walton into one of television's most beloved matriarchs had just suffered a massive stroke that left her unable to speak clearly or move the right side of her body. What happened next, her fight to come back, her quiet disappearance from the credits, and the eventual truth about her final years on the show, is only one thread in a much larger story about a series that looked, from the outside, like the warmest family on television, but which was, behind the cameras, dealing with illness, ambition, grief, and the simple human need to grow beyond a single role. The Waltons premiered on CBS in the fall of 1972, built from the memories of writer Earl Hamner Jr., who drew on his own Depression-era childhood in rural Virginia to create the Walton family of Walton's Mountain. Audiences fell in love almost instantly with the sprawling, seven-child household led by John and Olivia Walton, narrated in retrospect by the eldest son, John Boy, an aspiring writer whose voice bookended every episode with reflection and warmth. For 9 seasons, the show became appointment viewing, a rare hour of television that traded spectacle for sincerity. But sincerity on screen did not mean stability off it, and the actors who filled those roles were living real lives that eventually pulled several of them away from the mountain, sometimes gently, sometimes abruptly, and always for reasons far more layered than the simple line contract dispute that tabloids of the era liked to print. The most famous departure, and the one still debated by fans decades later, belongs to Richard Thomas, the actor who originated the role of John Boy Walton and won an Emmy for it in 1973. Thomas left the series after its 5th season, in 1977, and for years the reason circulated as rumor rather than record. What is verifiable, drawn from Thomas's own interviews over the decades, including conversations archived by the Television Academy Foundation, is that his decision was not born of conflict with the cast or the network, but of a young actor's fear of being permanently defined by a single character. Thomas had married in 1975 and soon became a father to twins, and he has spoken candidly about wanting to build a career beyond Walton's Mountain while he still had the freedom to try. He wanted to act in films, to take on roles that were nothing like the gentle, bookish son he had played since his early 20s, and he understood, correctly, that staying too long inside a beloved character could make that transition impossible. There was also the matter of geography and family life. Production kept him away from his growing children for long stretches, and by his own account, the balance between the demands of series television and the demands of fatherhood became difficult to sustain. CBS and Lorimar, the studio behind the series, did not want to lose him, and the show's writers initially tried to accommodate a reduced presence, sending John Boy to New York to pursue his writing career within the story itself, a narrative device that mirrored the actor's real desire to step outside the mountain. When Thomas ultimately chose not to return full-time, the producers were left with a genuine creative problem. How do you continue a show when its narrator and emotional center is gone? Their solution was to recast the role, a decision almost unheard of for a character so closely identified with one performer. Robert Whiteman stepped into the part in 1978, playing an older John Boy who had survived a plane crash and returned home with a different face and a different voice, a plot explanation that gave the recasting a narrative logic even as it asked audiences to accept a jarring change. Whiteman has spoken in later interviews about the pressure of following Thomas, describing it as one of the hardest assignments an actor could take on, stepping into a role the audience already loved in someone else's image. The experiment lasted 2 seasons before the character was written out more permanently, and the show adjusted its center of gravity toward the other Walton children. Thomas, for his part, never fully vanished from the Walton universe. He returned for several of the television reunion movies produced in the 1980s and 1990s, suggesting that his departure had never been about resentment, but about timing, ambition, and the ordinary desire of a young performer to see what else he could become. If Thomas's exit was about ambition, the departure of Geer, who played Grandpa Zebulon Walton, was about something far more final. Geer was already in his early 70s when the series began, a veteran stage and screen actor whose career stretched back to the 1930s and who had survived being blacklisted during the McCarthy era for his political activism, a chapter of his life documented extensively in theater histories and in his own oral history interviews. By the time The Waltons became a hit, Geer was something of an elder statesman on set, beloved by the younger cast members, several of whom, including Judy Norton and Mary McDonough, have described him in later interviews as a genuine mentor and grandfather figure both on camera and off. In April of 1978, Geer died of respiratory failure at his ranch in Topanga Canyon, California, at the age of 76. His death was not a departure in the way Thomas's had been. It was a loss the entire production had to absorb in real time, and the writers chose to honor it by having Grandpa Walton die within the show's own storyline rather than simply disappear or be replaced. It was one of the few moments where the fictional Walton family's grief and the real grief of the cast and crew were, by necessity, one and the same, and longtime viewers still cite the episode addressing his death as one of the most emotionally raw hours the series ever produced. Ellen Corby's story unfolded on a similarly painful but different timeline. Corby, who played Grandma Esther Walton and had already built a substantial career including an Academy Award nomination for her supporting role in the 1948 film I Remember Mama, suffered a serious stroke in 1976 that left her partially paralyzed and affected her speech. She was absent from the show for an extended period while she underwent rehabilitation, and when she did return, the production made the unusual choice to write her recovery into the storyline itself, having Grandma Walton suffer and slowly recover from a stroke on screen, a decision that allowed Corby to keep working within physical limitations the scripts could accommodate. It was a rare instance of a network drama adjusting its narrative around an actor's real medical condition rather than quietly replacing her, and it reportedly meant a great deal to Corby, who was determined not to be pushed out of a role she had fought hard to make her own. She continued in a reduced capacity for several more seasons, though a second stroke in 1978 further limited her involvement, and her appearances became increasingly occasional in the show's later years. Corby's resilience became, in its own way, as much a part of the Walton mythology as anything scripted, a testament to an actress who refused to let illness be the final word on her career, even as it undeniably reshaped how much of that career she could still give. Michael Earned, who played matriarch Olivia Walton and won 3 consecutive Emmy Awards for the role between 1973 and 1976, made her own choice to step back from the series in 1979 during its 8th season, and her reasoning, laid out in interviews over the years including conversations with television historians, centered on a mixture of professional restlessness and personal need. Learn has said that after years of playing television's most steadfastly patient and selfless mother, she felt an urgent pull toward roles with more emotional range, and toward theater work that she felt series television could not offer her. The producers, aware that removing her outright might feel like a betrayal to audiences who had watched Olivia Walton anchor the family for the better part of a decade, wrote a storyline in which Olivia contracts tuberculosis and travels to Arizona for treatment, allowing the character to exit gradually rather than vanish. Learn has since described the decision to leave as difficult but necessary, a recognition that comfort and stability, however valuable, were not what she wanted from her career at that particular moment in her life. She returned for guest appearances and for the reunion films that followed the series' original run, and audiences who had feared they had seen the last of Olivia Walton were, in time, given at least partial closure. Not every member of the Walton family left, and it is worth noting how many of the actors who played the Walton children stayed with the show for its entire run, a fact that makes the departures of Thomas, Geer, Corby, and Learn stand out even more sharply. Ralph Waite, who played family patriarch John Walton, remained with the series from its first episode in 1972 through its final season in 1981, later reflecting in interviews on how rare that kind of continuity had become even by the standards of network television at the time. Judy Norton, Mary McDonough, John Walmsley, Eric Scott, David W. Harper, and Cammie Cotler, who played Mary Ellen, Aaron, Jason, Ben, Jim Bob, and Elizabeth Walton respectively, Each stayed with the production for the majority or entirety of its 9 seasons, growing up quite literally in front of the cameras. Norton has spoken publicly about what it meant to spend her adolescence on that set, noting in later interviews that the Walton cast and crew functioned, in practical terms, as a genuine second family, one that shaped her sense of professionalism and craft far beyond what a typical acting job could offer a teenager. For the child actors who stayed the course, the series became less a job and more a formative environment, one they have returned to again and again in memoirs, documentaries, and fan convention appearances, treating their years on Walton's Mountain not as a chapter to escape, but as a foundation to build upon. What emerges when you look closely at these departures is not a story of scandal or betrayal, the kind of dramatic falling out that tabloid headlines of the era sometimes implied, but a story about the ordinary, unavoidable collisions between a long-running television show and the real lives of the people who made it. Richard Thomas needed to prove to himself and to the industry that he was more than John Boy, while Geer's body simply gave out after a long and remarkable life. Ellen Corby fought to keep working through a medical crisis that would have ended many careers outright. Michael Earned wanted new creative challenges after years of embodying stability for millions of viewers. Each of these choices, whether forced by illness or chosen out of ambition, reshaped the show that audiences thought they knew, and yet the Waltons endured through all of it, a testament to Earl Hamner Jr.'s original vision and to a supporting cast willing to carry the weight of the family whenever a chair at the dinner table went empty. There is something quietly moving in the fact that a show built around the idea of family, imperfect but enduring, ended up mirroring that very theme in its own production history. Actors arrived, actors left, some by choice and some by circumstance beyond anyone's control, and the mountain kept standing regardless. Fans who grew up saying goodnight to John Boy, to Mary Ellen, to Jason and Aaron and Ben, one by one across the closing minutes of each episode, were, without realizing it, watching a family that was always in motion behind the scenes, adjusting to loss and change just as real families do. Richard Thomas went on to a long and respected career in film, television, and theater, including a notable run playing Atticus Finch.